You read the title, you know what you're getting into. A Nintendo Direct is coming this week, and I believe that in the very core of my soul. A lot of people were talking about it, and I didn't think it makes sense, and to be honest, I still don't think it makes sense. But Nate the Hate has come out, and he said to stop the constant questions. Yes, I've heard that there is a Nintendo presentation this week. I believe it is on or around Thursday, and it will be a Direct, but I'm not 100% certain on the format at present. Alright, I did not believe this whatsoever until Nate the Hate came out and said it, and from now on, I will just believe him until he proves me wrong, because the Nintendo Switch 2 was pretty much leaked by him. We knew January 16th was going to be the day because he said that was exactly when it was going to be, and he was totally right. Even when everyone was making fun of him, even when everyone was coming after me for also saying that this was true because he said it and I just agreed with it, and then on the day before they didn't announce it and people were saying it's unprecedented, it won't happen, they won't make a shadow drop for their new console, that's just stupid, you guys are ridiculous, and here we are. Now we know he was right, and now I honestly believe every single word he says, unless he is proven wrong otherwise. So, there will be a Nintendo Direct this week, but what format and what day? To be honest, I think Wednesday probably makes the most sense because 7 days before the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct feels just about right to give that Thursday-Friday weekend room right before the Switch 2 hype fully begins, and trust me, Nintendo knows they don't need to garner much hype for the Switch 2, it is already up through the roof and that event will take care of itself. This Direct, however, needs a little bit more time, and I wonder if that is why they are giving it this limelight. This Direct will probably be the very last one dedicated to the Nintendo Switch, and I wonder if it's probably going to be something like a mini or just a partner showcase. I honestly think a partner showcase is most likely here. An Indie World could also be possible just to get those last games out there on the Switch before the Switch 2 is released, but I don't think they have to do that right now. I think they can do an Indie Direct after the Switch 2 Direct, and it will be just fine. And plus, to be honest, like if you really think about it, any and every game they release or reveal here at this Direct will also be playable on the Switch 2. So it's hard to say that this is stealing away the spotlight from the Switch 2 because of the backwards compatibility aspect. There have been a lot of Switch games that were rumored for a long time, the Wind Waker, Twilight Princess bundle, or those games separately or together or whatever you want to call them, the Metroid Prime 2 and 3 remakes, all of these other games like Kirby Planet Robobot, even Kid Icarus. People have rumored Kid Icarus for a very long time. But my point mostly just is, Nintendo could have a lot of other games up their sleeve that they want to put out on the Switch 1, get out there before all of this stuff goes down, because Xenoblade Chronicles X was the very last Switch 1 game. I mean, sure, we know Metroid Prime 4 is on the way, Pokemon ZA is on the way, but in terms of games that will be completely and totally exclusive to the Switch 1, that's it. And of course, Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon ZA are also exclusive for the Switch 1 that we know are coming soon, but those games will probably also have Switch 2 versions. And I've not been a big proponent of dual platform releases here, and I really don't think Nintendo should go that route, but for games that have been in development for such a long time, it does make sense to just up-res those games, put a 2 on it, and give it out to that new console. But to be honest, I really do think we could see a bunch of other first-party games for the Switch 1 that wouldn't necessarily break the bank and kill the Switch 2's momentum. Because Wind Waker, for example, Twilight Princess, for example, those are games that would make us insanely happy. Switch owners would be so happy, Zelda fans would be over the moon. We've been asking for these games for so long, and yet no one in their right mind would ever say, "Oh man, I wish I had these ports of a port on the Switch 2 day one," right? Like, we're not going to complain if this isn't a Switch 2 version. We just want the games on our Switch, and we can play them backwards compatibly on the Switch 2. It makes total sense to me, that kind of game. Kirby Planet Robobot, a remake of Fire Emblem, like those kinds of games, I'm not going to care necessarily that they're not Switch 2 exclusives because I've got my Switch. I love my Switch. I don't really need a specific version that says 2 on it and make me happy. Like, I'm good with the Switch 1 for a lot of these other games. It's the exclusives like the new Mario Kart, a new Smash, a new Animal Crossing, games that can really only run on the next generation of hardware that I want to be Switch 2 exclusive, not remakes of games that have been remade over and over again, you know? So that's one reason why I think it is pretty feasible that this could happen. The other reason is probably a little bit more realistic, which is a partner showcase. They could just show off a whole bunch of third-party games that people have been developing for years, because if you think about it, Nintendo isn't necessarily saying to every single third party, this is the month or year time frame that you can expect to be playing on the Switch 2 and developing for the Switch 2. They don't want to get that information out there to be leaked, so these developers have been working maybe 3-4 years ago. They started development development. Maybe even 2 years ago they started development for some of these games, and they wanted to get it out on the Switch, but then the Switch 2 came along, and they were like, Nintendo, what the heck, my game's gonna not sell at all now, because people are gonna be focused on the Switch 2. And they say in response, well, we'll give you one more direct. We'll give you one last spotlight for you to show off your game, and if people don't buy it, it's on you. And even if it's just a mini and they only give us like a couple first-party games with a little bit of third-party to supplement, that's still really cool. Like, that's still amazing that we get even a little bit of something to send off the Switch 1 in its entirety and say, hey, love ya, thank you, we're moving on to the next thing. Now, another thing that I find a little bit interesting about this Direct, I remember back in the 2017 days around the Switch's first launch, they didn't necessarily commit to the idea of the Switch being it. Like, they had the 3DS at the time, it was pretty successful, and all those games were pretty much keeping them afloat because the Wii U, Lord knows, the Wii U would not have kept them afloat alone, so they were really not committing. Like, oh, yeah, the Switch, it's our next big thing, but you know, we're still going to develop stuff for the 3DS, right? And they did. And for those first couple Directs in that year, even up to 2018, I believe, they had like 5, 10, 15-minute spotlights of the 3DS games only. I remember they announced like Luigi's Mansion, a remake of that game for the 3DS, not for the Nintendo Switch, which, hey, they were developing that a long time before the Switch started, and that makes sense, but still, you gotta release it on the Switch too, right? And that's what we were all thinking at the time, and yet they still stayed dedicated to that little 3DS system. Samus Returns was announced and released within like a 2-month period for the 3DS. The game didn't sell well because it's a Metroid game, and it was on the secondary console that it was at the very end of its lifespan. I think Nintendo can confidently say the Switch 2 is going to be a success. How big of a success, nobody knows. I anticipate it'll be a mild success to a great success, probably somewhere around that 80 to 100 million sales. Those are still amazing sales for a console, by the way, but just not earth-shattering like the Nintendo Switch was. But they still have to think, okay, we have 150 million plus Switch users who are going to feel abandoned if we just all of a sudden say, sorry, you don't get anything. We're done. You don't get anything. And I don't want them to dual platform release the heck out of this year and just all the Switch 2 games feel as though they didn't even need to be on the new console because they're already on the old console. But I think for games like Metroid Prime 4, Pokemon ZA, those are the types of games, other things that might fill out in between, Wind Waker, etc., things that they could announce at this Direct for the rest of this year for us to then say, okay, Switch owners, you still have towards the end of this year, because we know Pokemon ZA is a holiday title. That is going to be the final holiday that you can own a Switch 1 and feel satisfied in Nintendo, knowing they didn't entirely abandon you, because sure, the Switch 2's out, that's what their main focus is, that's where you go for all the big Mario and Zelda games, all the big new stuff, but still, if you own a Switch, we're gonna dedicate ourselves to you, right? We're not gonna abandon you completely. You're gonna get a little bit of stuff here and there, but remember, it's all backwards compatible as well, and everyone else is on their Switch 2s, and man, it's almost Black Friday, and you really need a Switch 2, don't you? That's the kind of mentality Nintendo wants to put in people, not necessarily the mentality of, wow, they left me out in the cold, which would kind of be the case if they didn't have some sort of Direct like this to at least dedicate more games to the Switch 1. This Direct could be more of a goodwill push and more of like a third-party push than anything, to be honest. Nintendo has really no reason to do another Direct for the Switch 1 outside of that, in my opinion, unless they just truly do have a bunch of new games for the Switch 1, in which case I would feel a little bit weary about why they chose to do that and why they chose to release it when they did, but still, I think it is extremely plausible that this Direct will happen this week, and they could have some first-party announcements, or guess what? Here's option number 3. Maybe there's no Direct at all, and maybe if there is a Direct, there's zero Nintendo first-party stuff. There is a very good chance that 1, this just doesn't happen and everyone's reputation goes down the drain and Nintendo says, ha, we gotcha, we found your source and that source is outed. So maybe this is just a fake rumor because Nintendo wanted to see how far people would go with it, and we look back and we go, of course, man, of course they weren't going to give us a Switch 1 Direct literally 6 to 7 days before the Switch 2 Direct. That doesn't make any sense. But also, Nintendo is literally the most unpredictable company in the world, and I believe in anything that they could do as long as it's weird. If it's normal, if it's predictable, I'm not so sure, but if it's something that no one would ever predict, they're probably gonna do it, and this seems just unreasonable enough for it to be totally plausible. And honestly, it could just be, like I said earlier, a partner showcase, and it's just third-party stuff, and it's not that exciting, and if that's the case, cool. Third-party developers will get their last spotlight before the Switch 2 Direct, and Nintendo will take up every last bit of that spotlight next week for the Nintendo Switch 2. And the next piece of evidence here that I think could mean something or totally mean nothing is all of the recent Silksong hype and Silksong news, quote-unquote news, because the Steam page got updated to add a bunch of stuff in which people are claiming that stuff means that the game is pretty much done and they're about to release it. So there is a minute chance, a very, very small chance, that at this Direct Wednesday or Thursday, Silksong is revealed and they release it that day or give a release date for later on, because technically the Silksong game was a Switch 1 exclusive announced back in 2019. So it makes sense that they would want to fulfill that promise and release it on the Switch. And it also makes sense that maybe that means nothing for this week, and that is just them preparing for next week, and that Silksong will be at the Switch 2 Direct, because I have been saying that for a long time. But maybe Nintendo doesn't want that. Maybe they want Silksong to be at its own thing, and maybe next week will be completely and totally first party. I don't know, and this is exciting to talk about, and honestly, it could date very poorly. We could just have no Direct whatsoever, but at least I got this out there and got you informed. This is what's going on. This is how crazy we are right now. We're so crazy for Nintendo news. We're so crazy and rabid that we are predicting a Direct. We're saying there's going to be a Direct literally 6 to 7 days prior to the actual Switch 2 Direct. That is how insane we are. So make sure you like and subscribe if you are just as insane as me and all of these other people who believe it. Click the notification bell to know exactly when I upload my videos, and consider joining my membership program to get early access to all of my videos and support the channel financially. It really helps, and I appreciate you so much for even thinking about it. If you are as obsessed with the Switch 2 as I am, go watch my playlist on the right side of your screen with all of the Switch 2 videos I have ever made, and click on the left video if you want to know exactly why I think personally May is not the release month for this new console. Thank you so much for watching Ray's Nintendo Talk. I have been Ray, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day.